Terry, what you cooking in there? Is that a pass rush I smell?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Going to help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. So if you do not know me, I am your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. Knowles, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that has stayed up past midnight on a Friday on the East Coast. And for those of you overseas that are, at the wee hours of the morning staying up, right, as everydayers. That's the true everydayer. That you're going saying no sleep, don't care. Got to hear what Aaron thinks about the Atlanta Falcons first round pick, and we call you everydayers. And all you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So we're going to talk about the pros, the cons, the give, the take, with the Falcons selecting two edge rushers, not one, just 2 edge rushers, and Jaylen Walker and James Pearce Jr., right? We had the free guarantee, as it was coined on Locked On Sports Atlanta, right? We're going to definitely get an edge rusher. Well, we got 2. So we'll talk about how we got there, but man, 2 potential defensive cornerstones when it comes to the Atlanta Falcons pass rush: Jaylen Walker from Georgia at pick 15 and James Pearce Jr. out of Tennessee at pick 26. Double dipping. This is the Terry Fontenot special. Now it seems like they did it last year with the quarterback position. It didn't, they took 2 swings at quarterback in Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix. Unprecedented in NFL history. I haven't even looked up to see if a team has taken 2 edge rushers in the first round. I don't think so. I feel like the Jets did it way back in the day when they took John Abraham back in 2000, and they took another edge rusher in that draft class, but that's just off the top of the dome. Again, still, that's 25 years ago when we're talking about that. Maybe there's a more recent example, but the Terry Fontenot special is like, we got a problem and we're going to take 2 swings at it. And with 2 big swings at it. Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix at the quarterback position last year after 2 years of inept quarterback play, subpar quarterback play in the post-Matt Ryan era. And they were like, never again are we going through this. Well, they took 2 swings at the pass rusher position. It's not 2 years of subpar, inept pass rush. It's 20 years with the Atlanta Falcons, right? All you hear, you've been hearing it for 12 years now. Falcons haven't had a difference maker since John Abraham when he left back in 2013. And so now the Falcons feel like they got 2 difference makers. So 2 swings of the bat. Did they just knock 2 out the park, or are we going to get 2 strikeouts? That's the big question. Time will only tell on that issue. But how did we get here with Jaylen Walker? We talked about this all week long. We talked about this on the preview show that we did earlier on Thursday evening before the draft started, that if the Carolina Panthers, who have been mocked Jaylen Walker for months at pick number 8, passed on Jaylen Walker, and they did, taking Tedoroa McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona. Need some corners to deal with some size. So again, another big wide receiver. AJ Terrell's not going to be locked down. Let's get a big corner, round 3. More on that later. If the Carolina Panthers passed on Jaylen Walker, that the most likeliest pick, looking at all those mock drafts, when people didn't have Jaylen Walker going 8 to Carolina, most often they had him going 15 to Atlanta. Daniel Jeremiah had that selection in his final mock, and it proved prophetic. And we talked about it on the preview show, that if Jaylen Walker does get past Carolina, I think he's going to be the top option for the Atlanta Falcons, and that proved prophetic, right? They got their UGA guy that the Georgia fans have been clamoring for years, decades. It's been 14 years, I think, since Akeem Dent. So they took a Georgia guy in the top 100. The first time they'd taken a Georgia guy in round 1, we talked about, if not this year, when? Because given all the Malachi Starks and Michael Williams and Jaylen Walker and all the players that matched up with needs for this football team, and they got their Georgia guy. So Georgia fans, happy, celebrating in the streets in Athens. Please, don't speed, okay? But how did they get Pearce? They traded back into round one. Jarvis and I were wrapping up our reaction to the Jaylen Walker thing. And then we in the stream on Locked On Sports Atlanta, we see in the chat, they're saying, hey, the Falcons just traded back. And we're thinking, oh, they're trolling. And then we go on Twitter and we see, oh, the Falcons did trade back up. They traded back with the LA Rams, who were holding pick 26. They moved from 46 to 26, gave up their 7th round pick at the end of this year's draft, pick 242, throwaway pick. But more importantly, gave up next year's number 1 pick. Future first. They got a 3rd round pick in return from the Rams, 3rd round pick that the Falcons lacked, pick 101 at the very end of second to last pick in round 3 on tomorrow's. We'll talk about what the Falcons maybe eyeing at that role later in today's episode. But you look at the various trade value charts that to go from 46 to 26, the Falcons basically needed to give up a mid to late 2nd round pick, depending on what trade value chart. That was actually pick 46 was worth the amount of points on one trade value chart. Pick 55 was worth the amount of points on another trade value chart. But the rule of thumb in the NFL is this year's 2 means you got to trade next year's 1. And so that's what the Falcons wound up doing. And was it too much? Time will tell. I'm skeptical, guys. Like I sat here saying, like, I do not want to give up a future asset for a regime that's potentially on the hot seat for, a player in this year's draft. And, if the Falcons have a regime change next year, that new GM is going to come in hamstrung, but they're going big. They're going bold. And Arthur Blank gave him carte blanche to do that. And we'll see if it works out for them. Now, if you missed that preview show, we listed the 6 edge rushers that were likely to be the Falcons pick, not including Abdul Carter, right? We talked about trading up for Abdul Carter. It's like, it's not worth it. Don't give up the future number 1. Giving up the future number 1, not for Abdul Carter, but for James Pearce. Interesting choice. But we talked about 6 edge rushers that were likely to go in round 1 that were on the table for the Atlanta Falcons that include Jaylen Walker, that include James Pearce, Mykel Williams, Mike Green, Donovan Ezeraku, Shamar Stewart. And I ranked them in the hierarchy in which I thought they would be on the Falcons board. I had Walker 1, Green 2, Pearce 3, right? Based off of all the rumors and smoke that we've been hearing the last couple of days. But in terms of how I ranked those guys, I actually had Pearce 5 and Walker 6. That I was the lowest on these 2 particular edge rushers that the Falcons chose. And so you can understand why I probably have a little bit more skepticism about whether or not these moves are going to work out in the long term than probably your average Falcon fan sitting here right now that's looking at Jaylen Walker, looking at James Pearce and being like, these are 2 home runs with the Falcons pick. Right. But I'm eager to go and take a deeper look on the film after the draft over the next couple of weeks as I watch the film of both of these guys and see if they do wind up growing on me. That happens all the time. Pre-draft, I watch a couple of games. I think I've watched 4 games now for James Pearce, 5 games for Jaylen Walker. We'll probably wind up watching 10, 12, maybe even 15 games for both of these guys when all is said and done. And it's potential that I will wind up being like, oh, I was too low on these guys. These guys have a lot more potential, or maybe I'm even lower on those guys than I was before. So that will be tell, but I'm eager to go and do that deep dive. That's, you got to grind the film, guys. So, as I said, my initial reaction is it's not worth it, right? With this lame duck regime, but this team needs to win now. And this is the bold move. Is it going to help them win now? Right. We again, you've heard me say for months, if not years on this podcast, this team has been far too complacent about their circumstances. And this move is the opposite of complacency. And also at the same time, it does rub a little bit of what I've been talking about, where this team has acted like they're a couple of pieces away. And this move sort of acts like, hey, we're just 2 good cornerstone pass rushers away from, making that move. And maybe they are. But at the same time, it's like, this is a big, bold move. This is a team that's saying, hey, never again. Like they said last year with the quarterback position. And hopefully, rather than going 1 for 2 at the quarterback position, then they'll go 2 for 2 at the pass rusher position moving forward. So, the question is going to be, are we going to get an immediate impact from either one of these guys? That's the big question. That's going to be the thing that the film is going to tell us. We'll break down, I'm sure for the next several months, all summer long, we'll be debating, exactly how the Falcons should maximize these guys, all the reasons why not, that these guys are going to be immediate impact players. And so let's dip our toes into that debate right now and break down first Jaylen Walker as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So as a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind. And when it comes to hiring, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. And that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy for you to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. When you post your job, LinkedIn has a new feature that can help you write job descriptions and then quickly put your job in front of the right people so that you can get those deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Use the hashtag hiring frame and add it to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. And that's why 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn's helping me find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So for those of you that need the skinny on Jaylen Walker, that you haven't really been paying that much attention to Jaylen Walker because you've just been assuming, like everybody else has been assuming, he's going to be a top 10 pick and he's not going to be on the table for the Falcons. We did talk about Jaylen Walker back in, I think, March on a mock draft Monday, and I expressed some of the reasons why I'm a little lower on Jaylen Walker. We'll go over some of those issues, but the lowdown on Jaylen Walker, he was a hybrid player at Georgia, played about 60% of his snaps this past year as an off-ball linebacker, about 40% on the edge, A++ character, has the makeup that Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris and this organization and regime always stresses. We care about makeup and character and all those various things, and by all means, Jaylen Walker has A++ character, right? I saw a quote, I think at some point, that like people were like, he could be your defensive coordinator, right? if I'm not mistaken. And the expectation, even though he played, 2 roles in Georgia's defense, the expectation he'll probably play a little. He might dabble as an off-ball linebacker. We'll see. I don't think the Falcons are going to need him because they have 2.5 starters at that position. Caden Ellis, Divine Diablo, who they signed in free agency, and the half starter is Troy Anderson in the event that maybe, just maybe, guys. And I know you're sitting here shaking your head, Aaron. Aaron, you're still on this hill. You're still dying on this hill. Yeah, just maybe. Troy Anderson stays healthy, and the player that we saw in that one game last year, we actually see in maybe 5, 6, 7 games. Maybe that's an asset for this defense. So I think we'll see Walker play primarily edge where the Falcons need more help. He has tools. There's a reason why people had him highly rated. I think the main reason is I think people were looking for the next Micah Parsons, and they feel like Jaylen Walker could be that next guy. Now, as I've expressed previously on the podcast, I think betting on hitting on another outlier, an outlier of outliers when it comes to Micah Parsons is not a high percentage bet, but that's very different. Taking that swing in the top 5 where some people had Jaylen Walker on their draft boards versus taking that in the middle of the first round, particularly in this type of draft. So, as I've said before, if you like the guy's versatility, you call him a hybrid. If you don't like the guy's versatility, then you call him a tweener. I tend to lean more towards the tweener side of things just because I'm not convinced that Jaylen Walker is going to be a high-end edge. I know it's a controversial take, but I kind of think his film is better as an off-ball linebacker than it is as an edge rusher. But the question with Jaylen Walker is, what is he going to impact sooner at the position in the next level? Probably edge rusher, because it's probably going to take him some time to develop as an off-ball linebacker. That's a harder job than just basically, hey, we need you to set the edge and we need you to go hunt the quarterback, right? And so, given his smaller stature, about 6'1", 240, there aren't too many edge rushers that are built like Jaylen Walker in the NFL. There's Micah Parsons, right? As I said, but not everybody's Micah Parsons. No, nobody's Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons is barely Micah Parsons. And instead, when you look at the type of players that are built like Jaylen Walker, a similar player that was an edge rusher in college, Caden Ellis, right? Built very similar frame. And the Saints in their defense were like, it's too small for us to put on the edge as a hand in the dirt defensive end, so we're going to move you to off-ball linebacker. And we saw Caden Ellis across 4 years develop, and the Falcons are benefiting from that development nowadays. And so the question is going to be, where exactly will Jaylen Walker's long-term role fit? But, I think as far as a pass rusher, he can come in, his only pass rush move, and again, this is one of the reasons why I'm a little lower on him, because he only really showed that he knew how to use a long arm. That's his only pass rush move. We'll see if the deeper dive on film, I can discover a secondary pass rush move. But that long arm shows some power, and we know that power translates. And the hope is that you can get Jaylen Walker and you can teach him other power moves, that speed to power conversion, that bull rush that needs to be taught to him. And if you can, there is some upside. There's no doubt there's some upside with him. So again, my main concern with Jaylen Walker is you need to have a plan. He needs to go to the right team that has a plan. And I think because of that development time frame with him as an edge rusher, potentially as a linebacker, he needs a stable environment where he can, be comfortable playing in the same scheme, same role for multiple years. And the question is Atlanta that environment, right? He doesn't have the highest floor as a pass rusher, if you ask me. It's to me lower than some of the guys in the first round, and I would argue some of the guys on day 2 in this draft. And my concern was, and I expressed this back in March when we broke him down, is what happens if this coaching staff gets fired and the new coaching staff comes in and says, oh, we don't like you as an edge rusher because they bring in a similar defense to what the Saints used to run and say, you're too small to be a defensive end in our 4-3 defense. We're going to move you to linebacker. And is that a smooth transition? And are you moving him back and forth? And does he not have the time to really establish at one position and learn one position and develop at one position? Or are we sitting here moving him all over the defense and whatnot and changing schemes and all those various things? So that's my big red flag with Jaylen Walker. That's not a Jaylen Walker issue. That's what is the environment around Jaylen Walker that can foster his development concern for me. And I don't know if Atlanta is that situation as we sit here today. But obviously, if this regime can win games, they will stay employed, and that becomes less of an issue. And so my concern is, because that's a lesson I learned nearly 2 decades ago when the Falcons we're just going to draft good players and we'll figure it out later. That happened with Jimmy Williams, their top pick in the 2006 draft, where they drafted him to be a corner, and they figured out pretty early where it's like, I don't know if he's going to make it as that corner opposite D'Angelo Malone. And so then they were like, well, we're going to move you to safety. And they didn't really have an opportunity to play him at safety because they already spent money on Lawyer Malloy and Chris Crocker, and they didn't really have a plan for Jimmy Williams, and he was off the team by the time Mike Smith took over in 2008. And so that's why, to me, it's a little bit more of an issue for me, because I'm like, oh, I've seen this happen before when a team doesn't have a plan for a player, and they're just like, we're going to figure it out later. But we'll see. We'll see if Atlanta can be the place for him to blossom, and I hope I'm wrong on that sort of situation. So I'll be curious to see how he's utilized. Jarvis and I talked about it on Locked On Sports Atlanta on our reaction. Is he going to be that guy that lines up next to Caden Ellis in the A gap? As we see this team use that aggressive scheme that we're hoping for, that simulated pressure, because they don't have where they can put 4 guys and say, go get the quarterback, right? Even with the additions of Walker and Pearce coming in to the building. Are those guys going to be those immediate impact players right away, like we saw with the Jared Verse? We'll see. Again, maybe the potential is there, but I think the Falcons are going to have to use simulated pressures and rather than just having 4 guys on the line of scrimmage say, go hunt the quarterback, let's put 5, 6, 7 or more guys on the line of scrimmage, and let's confuse offenses, and they don't know who's coming and from what angles, with Leonard Floyd and Arnold Ebiketie, Jaylen Walker, James Pearce, Caden Ellis, Morgan Fox, Ruka Roar, all those guys, right? And just confusing the heck out of defense. That's, to me, sort of the vision I can see right now, and we'll see, how Jaylen Walker develops in that sort of environment. And so I think the upside is there. If we can continue to develop that, 3 to 5 years down the road, we could be sitting here talking about Jaylen Walker as one of the best defenders in the NFL. I'm sure I have so many Georgia fans screaming at me, telling me, Aaron, you don't know. You're going to see this guy's going to be an absolute dog. He goes from a dog to being an absolute dog. He's going to be one of the best players in the NFL. And so I certainly think he'll be a useful piece. The question is he going to be the guy? Is he going to be the guy that we're going to be sitting here on a 3rd and 6 being like, I need you to go out there and sack Josh Allen. Can you do it? We'll see. So time will tell on that. So, he's a guy that teams are going to be betting on. As I said, he's the type of guy that various people say you can build your defense around. He's the guy that changes your culture, A++ character. But that's not really what people are saying about James Pearce. And we'll break down why the Falcons are saying something differently, plus the concerns that so many people have about James Pearce as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So the NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is going to give new customers, right? The NBA playoffs are here, right? What's here? They're not almost here. They're here, right? And if you head on over to FanDuel, and if you're a new customer, you get an incredible way to get in on the action. Because right now, when you join FanDuel, you place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. And we love FanDuel for all those player props that you can combine into one to get a same game parlay, bet a little, win a lot, chance to win big. So, whether it's the 3-pointers or steals, assists, FanDuel is going to give you so many ways to bet your favorite player props. And did you take advantage of all the FanDuel props for the 2025 NFL draft? Over, under, quarterbacks taken in round 1. Who's going to be the Falcons pick? Again, we gave you that free guarantee. You could have won money by taking that pick in the edge rusher for FanDuel and those odds and whatnot. So don't miss out on the next free guarantee, and head on over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. So we talked about the growing buzz for James Pearce being the Falcons pick at 15 at the beginning of the week. It started with Jonathan Jones dropping his mock draft and saying, hey, Jonathan Jones has a pretty good hit rate. Now that hit rate's 80%, 4 out of 5. Under the Terry Fontenot regime, he's nailed the Falcons' first round pick. If we're counting nailing the James Jones pick. And again, I think it's fair to the Falcons basically looked at it and said, hey, we can't pass on a value like Jaylen Walker at this point in time, but we still want James Pearce. Why am I saying James Jones? James Pearce, Jonathan Jones, and James Pearce, right? And so, we talked about why the Falcons would be attracted to a player like James Pearce, who we did not give that much attention at the beginning throughout the offseason because of the whole value of makeup and character and whatnot. And those were the question marks with James Pearce. More on that later. But we talked about why the Falcons would value James Pearce because we talked about their past tendencies, whether we're looking at Laiatu Latu, Arnold Ebiketie, Braylon Trice. They value collegiate production, right? And James Pearce had a ton of collegiate production. He was arguably the most productive pass rusher in college football the last couple of years based off of various PFF metrics over Mike Pearce, over Mike Green, over Donovan Ezeraku and others, right? And then we also talked about the SEC pedigree, comparing it to players like Donovan Ezeraku, comparing it to players like Mike Green. And so there was a lot of reasons to think that the Falcons, that, Jonathan Jones and as well as others that came out afterwards saying, hey, the Falcons like James Pearce, made a lot of sense. But the concern with James Pearce and why we didn't give him that much attention in the run up to the draft was, there were a lot of question marks, red flags, character related red flags. You hear these quotes from anonymous scouts. You hear things through the grapevine that the Tennessee coaches were not in love with James Pearce's commitment, his work ethic. He seemed checked out, or some of the vibes that they were saying with James Pearce this past year, right? That maybe he was reading too many of his press clippings last year when he was projected to be the number 1 overall pick. I think we had PFF's Max Chadwick, who covers college football for them, on the podcast talking about James Pearce and his future at some point last offseason. But I think the Falcons did their homework, right? We talked about some anonymous quotes. We listed like 3 anonymous quotes where 2 digged James Pearce and 1 was like, we're good on it. And we said, hey, the Falcons might be that team that says we're good on it, right? And I think the Falcons feel like, hey, we can combine him with Jaylen Walker. And if this guy's is going to go to practice with Jaylen Walker, A++ character guy, and not bust it in practice, like he's going to be left behind. So he's going to have to, step up. And so they feel like they have the room to motivate James Pearce if that's an issue, right? So with James Pearce, similar to Jaylen Walker, there's tools, there's talent. He's got that lean build, 6'4", 245, built similarly to Leonard Floyd, built similarly to guys like Brian Burns. And I talked about how, to me, and we'll see what the film says when I finally get to my floor, ceiling, and eye level comparisons for both of these guys. But I said, hey, there's a possibility that, if you squint, maybe James Pearce could be that Brian Burns type pass rusher that I know several Falcon fans that are still upset and butthurt by the Falcons passed on in 2019. Chris Lindstrom, they're fine, but they're like, man, if only we had gotten Brian Burns, maybe these pass rush concerns would have been long gone, would have been solved years ago. And so, like Burns, like Floyd, Pearce looks like a speed rusher. The knock on Pearce as a speed rusher is that, a lot of his wins, at least from the film I've seen so far, and again, we'll see what the deeper dive says, says that he wins mostly by timing the snap, which is, not a bad thing, but at the same time, it's like you should be able to win purely with speed rather than just being able to time the snap perfectly. Now, I think Pearce has some power that we know translates, but I think he doesn't have enough power where that's going to be an overwhelming element of his pass rush arsenal in the ways that it is for, Jared Verse and other highly productive power rushers and whatnot. And again, we'll do a deeper dive into the film and see if maybe that opinion changes. But, my initial foray into film is like a lot of it looks a lot similar to Leonard Floyd, in terms of what we talked about, how Leonard Floyd was effective this past year in San Francisco. A lot of schemed wins off of stunts and twists with Pearce's athleticism and whatnot. And, maybe we'll do a Leonard Floyd comparison for James Pearce, maybe an eye level comp for him at some point this summer when we break down his film. And it took Floyd a better part of 5 years for him to become the Leonard Floyd that was a guy that was consistently getting 8 to 12 sacks every single, or 8 to 11 sacks every single season, right? We know Leonard Floyd's like, I'm trying to break my single season record, which I think is 11 and a half sacks this year. Now we need James Pearce to hit a little sooner than 5 years, right? Given the hefty price tag that the Falcons were willing to pay for him. But, again, I think with Walker, Floyd, and others in the room, they obviously feel like they're going to get that impact sooner versus later. And now the Falcons have an abundance of edge guys, right? They went from a room that you're like, Arnold Ebiketie, Leonard Floyd, Braylon Trice, D'Angelo Malone, this doesn't wow me. They got some pieces, but like this doesn't wow me. And now you're sitting here going, oh, well, I'm a little wild. We'll see. But how will they piece it together, right? Again, the Falcons are going to think this is a good problem to have. And we'll see how they, solve this problem, right? We know this regime is not well known for getting guys on the field immediately, getting that immediate impact and finding those opportunities. Or are we going to be sitting here frustrated in October watching, third downs where Arnold Ebiketie and Leonard Floyd are on the field and Jaylen Walker and James Pearce are on the sideline, right? That's a possibility. We'll find out. So that's ultimately things like that are going to determine whether this first round pick is worth it. As I said at the top, I'm skeptical of that, but time will tell, right? And they gave up these draft assets. They still have a third round pick tomorrow, pick 101. Second to last pick in round 3. So not really a trade back opportunity, at least on tomorrow. So, if the Falcons do decide to trade back, we won't get a pick tomorrow, basically. Maybe they decide to trade up, but maybe they continue to get aggressive. We'll see. But I'm hoping for that, third round pick to be a cornerback, get us a guy that could be to match up with some of the size that we're going to see in the NFC South with Mike Evans, Teteroa McMillan, right? Upgrade that nickel cornerback. Now we got to deal with Emeka Egbuka, right, with Tampa Bay, right? So we'll see if the Falcons get that corner. But, in addition to that third, they have a fourth now. They have a seventh now. Can they recoup some assets with some trades? Do they continue to be bold and aggressive, or the Falcons just trusting, hey, we're just 2 pieces away. We're 2 pass rushers away. That's all we needed, right? Again, feels very Terry Fontenot-esque and feels complacent and bold at the same time. It's bold placent, right? It's a weird feeling. That's why I'm sitting here, guys, like, I don't know how to feel about this. We'll see how it all comes together. But I think you can understand a little bit of my skepticism, where it's like, I'm glad that the Falcons are really taking a big swing to address their pass rush. This is what we've been hoping for with the team, 2 swings at addressing the pass rush. But, there's some potential backlash, potentially if it doesn't work out. Are we going to be sitting here, 8-9 months from now being like, hey, man, we're in the playoffs, baby. Like, we don't, that pick 24 in next year's draft, in the 2026 draft, that probably wasn't going to be the deciding factor. But, if the Falcons are sitting here staring at another 6-win season and picking in the top 10 or 12 or whatever, we're going to be like, Terry, you did it again, right? Or Terry, you did it again. It could go either way. And so time will tell on these issues. So it's one of those things where I understand perfectly people that are excited, optimistic about the bright future ahead for this Falcons pass rush with these 2 young players. I can understand some of you may be like, I don't know. So I'm in the middle. Like, we'll see. Again, ultimately, probably where I'll just fall is, in the next week or 2. Based off of how I feel about these guys watching the film, that's, my foundation is, watch the film and give you my opinions on that. So I'm a little skeptical at this point in time, just because my initial pre-draft dive into the film, I'm a little lower on these 2 specific pass rushers. It would be very different if this was Mike Green and, Shamar Stewart or Donovan Ezeraku or something like that. But we'll see. Time will tell on that issue. So that's going to be the story. We'll be back tomorrow reacting to whatever the Falcons do on day 2. Maybe they do something. Maybe they do nothing. We'll see. But continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And, of course, the Locked On Podcast Network has you covered, guys, for every single pick. You want a reaction to every single pick. You want a breakdown of every maybe not every single prospect. We'll see. We'll see what happens in round 7. But at least these first round picks, Locked On has you covered, the college side, the NFL side of things. So go check it out. Your favorite team, your least favorite team. Go check out Locked On Saints. See what Ross Jackson's saying about Mason Graham. Go check out Locked On Panthers. See what Julian Council's saying about Ted McMillan or T-Mac. I mean, I know he doesn't like being called that. And of course, James Yarko with Emeka Ibuka. So it's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.